At Havenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a young rescued cat was getting closer to the day when he would be released back into the forests of Oregon. This little feline, wild at heart, had spent months regaining his strength with careful rehabilitation, preparing for a life of freedom. However, everything changed when Snowflake, a fragile white kitten, arrived at the center. From their initial meeting, the cat's behavior shifted dramatically. Rather than keeping his distance, he became a devoted protector, curling around Snowflake both day and night. He even growled low whenever someone approached, leaving the staff, who were accustomed to working with wild animals, in disbelief. As the day of release approached, the cat's anxiety grew. He refused to leave Snowflake's side, pacing back and forth and calling out whenever they were separated. This behavior raised many questions. What was motivating this wild creature to act in such an unusual way? Why was he so eager to protect a kitten that wasn't of his own kind? The discoveries that followed would not only change their lives, but would also evoke strong emotions in the most seasoned veterinarians. As the soft hues of dawn filtered through the forest canopy, Dr. Thomas Winters began her morning rounds at the Havenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, nestled in the lush wilderness near Bend, Oregon. This center had been her passion for nearly 20 years. The crisp October air filled her lungs as she strolled along the gravel path, clipboard in hand, checking on the various wild patients. At 58, Dr. Winters had weathered hands and a sun-kissed face, features of someone dedicated to a life outdoors. Her silver-streaked hair was tied in a practical ponytail, and behind her wire-rimmed glasses, her eyes expressed both the fatigue of having witnessed much animal suffering and the determination of someone who had saved countless lives. "How's our patient in enclosure 12?" she inquired of Tom Redford, the center's head wildlife rehabilitator, who was busy preparing the morning medication schedule. Tom, a former forest ranger with 30 years of experience in wildlife management, looked up from his tasks. "The cat is recovering faster than we expected. The leg wound is healing well, and he's regained most of his muscle tone. I'd say he'll be ready in another 2 weeks." Thomas nodded with relief. He'll be ready for release. That was good news. When they first brought in the cat, he wasn't sure it would survive the night. The cat, which they named Wilder, had been discovered 3 months prior by a hiker. He was caught in an illegal trap, leaving a deep wound on his hind leg. By the time Wilder arrived at Havenwood, he was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and fighting an infection. Wilder was about 2 years old, showing off his muscular build and tufted ears typical of his species. His russet fur, marked with black streaks and spots, helped him blend into his woodland habitat. Unlike many rescued animals that adapt to human presence during their recovery, Wilder maintained his wild spirit. He would watch the staff with cautious amber eyes that never seemed fully relaxed. "He's still completely wild," Tom remarked the previous week, and that's exactly how it should be for a successful release. Wilder's rehabilitation was going according to plan. The team minimized human contact, offered environmental enrichment that mimicked natural hunting challenges, and gradually increased the size of his exercise area as he regained strength. The center's main goal was clear: return animals to the wild whenever possible. Thomas made a note on her clipboard for Wilder's pre-release assessment and continued her rounds. At that moment, the rehabilitation center housed 27 animals, from injured birds of prey to orphaned deer fawns, each with their own unique needs and recovery timelines. However, neither Thomas nor Tom could have foreseen how their carefully laid plans would change by nightfall. Just after sunset, the phone rang. Melissa Jane, the on-call veterinarian for the center, answered on the third ring. "Havenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, this is Dr. Jane." The voice on the other end was young and trembling. I found a kitten. It's really small, and I think it's dying. The animal hospital in town said they're full and told me to call you." Melissa sighed. While domestic animals weren't strictly part of their mission, she felt unable to turn away someone in need. "Where are you?" I asked, glancing outside the gates of the rehabilitation center. My dad had driven me here, and I was eager to meet my friend. "Bring it in, I'll meet you at the reception." 15 minutes later, Melissa was working carefully with a kitten that was the smallest she had encountered in her 12 years as a veterinarian. This little creature, a scrap of white fur no larger than her palm, had blue eyes still clouded with infancy. Each breath came with a concerning tremor that raised alarm bells in Melissa's mind. Nearby, Sophie Williams, the 14-year-old who had brought him in, stood anxiously with tears streaming down her freckled cheeks. "I found him under our porch," she explained. "There was no mama cat around, and he's been crying all day. How long has he been like this?" Melissa inquired as she listened to the kitten with her stethoscope. "I don't know. I only discovered him this afternoon, but he looked really bad already." Melissa's examination confirmed her worries. The kitten was severely undernourished, hypothermic, and had a respiratory infection that, if left untreated, could be fatal. At only 3 weeks old, he should have still been nursing from his mother. "We'll do everything we can," she reassured Sophie, whose father stood supportively at her side. "Can we call you with updates?" After taking down their contact information and accepting Sophie's tearful farewell, Melissa carried the tiny patient to the treatment room. She placed him on a heated pad, administered fluids to combat dehydration, and started him on antibiotics suitable for his delicate weight. "We'll need to feed him by bottle around the clock," she told Kayla Martinez, the newest staff member who was helping with the after-hours admission. "Every 2 hours, including overnight. Can you take the first shift while I set up a proper incubator?" Kayla nodded and began preparing the special kitten formula. "Does he have a name?" Melissa asked, looking down at the trembling white bundle. "Sophie called him Snowflake. I think it suits him," Kayla replied, gently stroking the kitten's head with one finger. "Poor little guy, you're safe now." Neither woman could have predicted that their new patient would soon turn the operation of the rehabilitation center upside down. By morning, Snowflake's condition had stabilized, although it remained fragile. Eleanor, arriving for her regular shift, was surprised to find a domestic kitten in their care, but quickly understood Melissa's concerns. "Once he's stronger, we'll reach out to the local rescue groups," she mentioned. "Right now, he needs more care than they can provide." The rehabilitation center followed strict guidelines, especially when it came to keeping different species apart. Wild animals in rehab were isolated from domesticated ones to prevent any chance of disease transmission or behaviors that could hinder their return to the wild. The setup of the enclosures was done carefully, ensuring that predators were kept away from potential prey to keep stress levels down. This is what made the events during feeding time that afternoon so surprising. Kayla was on her way to a quiet treatment area with Snowflake's incubator for his scheduled feeding when she passed by Wilder's enclosure. Normally, the cat showed little interest in what was happening at the center, but this time he suddenly became alert. He approached the front of his enclosure, his nostrils flaring as he picked up the scent of the kitten. What happened next caught Kayla completely off guard. Instead of showing the typical predatory behavior expected from a wild cat encountering a vulnerable smaller one, Wilder emitted a soft churring sound, a sound that cats usually reserve for their young. "Dr. Winters, you need to see this," Kayla called out, her voice filled with confusion. Thomas arrived quickly, his expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to astonishment as he took in Wilder's behavior. The cat was pacing along the edge of his enclosure, focused intently on the kitten, making sounds that no one had heard from him before. "Move the kitten away," he urged Kayla, his analytical mind already processing this unusual interaction. As she stepped back, Wilder seemed agitated, pawing at the mesh and increasing the volume of his vocalizations. "Bring him closer again," Thomas suggested, joining their observation. "Let's see if the reaction continues." When Kayla slowly moved Snowflake's incubator back toward Wilder, the wild cat immediately calmed down, sitting directly across from the glass, his gaze fixed on the tiny white form inside. "I've never seen anything like this," Thomas remarked softly. "In 20 years of working with cats, I've never witnessed one showing interest in a domestic cat except as prey." His brow furrowed as he contemplated the situation. "This doesn't make sense from an evolutionary or behavioral perspective. Cats are solitary by nature. They typically only come together in specific circumstances." The situation raised some concerns for Kayla, particularly about whether Wilder was viewing Snowflake as potential prey. Thomas noted Wilder's body language, He appeared relaxed, without the stillness typical of a predatory stance, and kept making soft sounds. This behavior seemed more protective than threatening. The three of them observed in silence as Wilder nestled against the front of his enclosure, as close as he could get to Snowflake. "We need to stick to our protocol," Thomas finally stated. "Let's move Snowflake to the treatment room as we planned. The last thing we want is for a wild cat to form a bond with a domestic animal." Kayla agreed and took Snowflake away. However, as the kitten left sight, Wilder's mournful calls filled the rehabilitation center, causing the three of them to exchange concerned glances. That night, Snowflake's condition took a turn for the worse. Despite the antibiotics, he struggled to breathe, and his temperature fell even with a warming pad underneath him. "I doubt he'll make it through the night," Melissa told Thomas around midnight, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Both women had remained late, taking turns to keep an eye on the ailing kitten. Thomas rubbed his tired eyes, stating, "We've done all we can medically. Sometimes, especially with such fragile young ones, it just isn't enough." As they talked about comfort measures for what they anticipated would be Snowflake's final moments, Kayla rushed into the office, her expression frantic. "Wilder won't stop calling for him. He skipped his evening meal and has been making that distressed sound since we moved Snowflake." Thomas was about to dismiss this information, considering the urgency of their current situation, when Melissa suddenly straightened up. "Wait, what if?" she suggested, her expression indicating she was about to propose something unconventional. "What if we try something a bit off the beaten path?" "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, too worn out to disregard any idea that might help. Studies have shown that maternal presence can enhance survival rates in struggling neonates across various species. Heart rates, oxygen levels, and temperature regulation all improve when there's proper physical contact. "I'm not suggesting we put them in the same space," Melissa clarified quickly, "but what if we keep them close together? What if we move Snowflake's incubator closer to Wilder's enclosure? It could help calm him down, allowing the other animals to rest." Normally, Thomas would have dismissed such an unconventional idea right away. However, with a dying kitten and nothing to lose, she found herself considering it. As a temporary measure, she agreed, provided that they kept a close watch on the situation. What happened over the next 8 hours would later be recognized in the Journal of Wildlife Rehabilitation as one of its most extraordinary cases. With careful planning, Snowflake's incubator was situated just outside Wilder's enclosure. This placement allowed Wilder to see and smell the kitten, but they made sure to put multiple safety barriers between them. Almost instantly, Wilder pressed up against the mesh, positioning himself as close to the incubator as he could, and began to produce a deep, comforting purr that filled the small space. By 3 a.m., Snowflake's breathing had become steadier, and by dawn, her temperature had stabilized. When the full team arrived the next morning, they witnessed something remarkable. Snowflake was taking formula from a syringe with newfound energy. "It's astonishing," Melissa remarked while reviewing Snowflake's vital signs. "I can't explain it medically, but her will to live seems to have increased overnight." The team continued this unusual setup throughout the day, keeping a close eye on both animals. Wilder remained fixated on Snowflake, hardly touching his own food and showing unwavering attention. When staff members approached to check on the kitten, Wilder would growl softly, not out of anger, but as a protective warning. "It's as if he's taken on the role of a guardian," Tom noted. But why was he acting this way? Thomas had been wrestling with this question since the day before. She spread Wilder's intake information on the break room table, pointing out a detail she had missed earlier. The report mentioned that the hiker who discovered Wilder had found signs of what appeared to be a predator attack nearby, including the remains of an adult female cat that had likely been killed within the previous 24 hours. The implication hung heavy in the room. "Do you think Wilder and that female cat were?" Tom began. "Possibly mates, or at least from the same territory," Thomas suggested. "Cats aren't typically social, but they can share overlapping ranges, especially during mating season. However, that still doesn't explain his protective behavior towards Snowflake," Kayla interjected. The situation raised an interesting question. Why would a cat, even if it had lost a potential mate, feel the urge to protect a kitten of a different species? Melissa, who had been quietly observing, offered a possible explanation. She mentioned that trauma responses in mammals can sometimes show up in surprising ways. Research indicates that animals experiencing loss may redirect their attachment behaviors toward unexpected subjects. While this isn't common, there are documented cases. Tom summed it up. So you're suggesting that our wild cat might have gone through a traumatic loss, got injured, was captured, and is now instinctively protective of this kitten? Melissa admitted it was just a theory, not scientifically proven in this particular situation, but it did provide a rationale for the behavior they were witnessing. Thomas shook her head, her scientific instincts struggling to make sense of it all. Regardless of the reason, she stressed that their primary focus had to remain on Wilder, who was due for release in less than 2 weeks. They couldn't let this unusual behavior jeopardize his rehabilitation. The team nodded in agreement, though they all understood the difficult implications of that decision. As the days went by, Snowflake grew stronger. His respiratory infection cleared up, he gained weight, and his curiosity, typical for kittens, started to shine through. The staff kept the two animals close to each other since they had yet to find a valid reason to change that arrangement. While both appeared to be doing well, Wilder's behavior did not normalize over time. Instead, he became increasingly focused on the kitten. Whenever Snowflake was taken away for medical treatments, Wilder paced anxiously until he returned. During their time together, Wilder would groom himself while keeping a watchful eye on the kitten, often reaching a paw toward the mesh barrier as if trying to touch him. News of this unusual bond circulated among the rehabilitation center staff, then spread to local volunteers, and eventually reached the broader wildlife rehabilitation community across Oregon. Opinions about the relationship were sharply divided. Dr. James Halden, a visiting wildlife veterinarian from Eastern Oregon University, argued against what he referred to as extreme anthropomorphism. You're attributing human emotions to natural behaviors that likely have different explanations, he said. Melissa countered, then can you explain why his cortisol levels drop when the kitten is around, or why he only eats full meals when he can see Snowflake? The debate persisted among the team, highlighting the complex dynamics of human-animal relationships and the challenges of interpreting animal behavior. The rehabilitation center staff found it hard to ignore the emotional reality unfolding before them. One day, during a typical handling session for Snowflake, a lively kitten now 4 weeks old, something unexpected happened. Snowflake managed to wriggle free from Kayla's hold and tumbled to the floor, letting out a startled squeak. Though no one heard his cry, it was a clear signal of distress, instantly prompting Wilder to leap against the mesh of his enclosure. The force was enough to shake the entire structure. Wilder's vocalization wasn't a typical meow. It was a call for help that even the most skeptical staff recognized as a sign of concern. Wilder only relaxed once Snowflake was safely picked up, examined, and returned to his incubator, looking unharmed. Later that evening, Thomas sat alone in her office. The space was quiet, save for the occasional calls of the nocturnal patients. On her desk lay 2 files: Wilder's release assessment paperwork and the transfer forms for Snowflake, who would be moving to Hart's Haven, a respected cat rescue in Portland, once he was weaned. By all professional standards, both animals were progressing well. The center was meeting its goals, yet Thomas felt uneasy about the choices facing her. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Tom entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, his expression revealing a shared concern. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, setting a mug in front of her. Thomas accepted the coffee with gratitude. "I keep telling myself we're following protocol and doing what's best for them both. But in my 30 years of wildlife work, I've never seen a bond like this. It's hard to explain, but it feels real." She tapped Wilder's file. "We're just 2 days away from his final release assessment. Everything shows he's physically ready, but emotionally..." Tom settled into the chair across from her. "I called Rafael Martinez today." Thomas raised an eyebrow. Rafael was a former staff member who now ran the Wild Heart Rehabilitation Center, a sanctuary for wildlife that couldn't be released back into their natural habitats. "His facility is full, but he knows someone, Lisa Townsend. She runs a licensed facility on 40 acres just outside Sisters and specializes in cases like this. What cases exactly? Thomas asked, her curiosity piqued. She asked, although she already had a feeling about the answer. The issue at hand involved non-releasable predators that required special considerations. Fortunately, she had the necessary permits, experience, and most importantly, the space to accommodate both animals together. Thomas felt the weight of his professional responsibility clashing with unexpected emotions. "We can't make decisions based solely on sentiment," he reminded her. "Our role is to return wildlife to their natural habitats whenever possible." "I agree," Tom responded thoughtfully, "but we also have to consider what gives each animal the best chance for a fulfilling life. The challenge is determining what that means for Welder." Finally, release day arrived. The sky was clear, and a crisp wind carried the scent of pine through the rehabilitation center. The transport crate was ready, lined with fresh straw and outfitted for the journey to the release site. This site was a remote area of protected forest where the cat would have plenty of territory and prey. Eleanor, Tom, Melissa, and Kayla gathered for a pre-release briefing, discussing the chosen location and the monitoring plan that would follow. The conversation was professional, reflecting their commitment to protocols they had repeated numerous times in the past. However, none of them mentioned the little white kitten being cared for separately in the treatment room, deliberately kept apart from the day's events. "Okay," Thomas said after glancing at his watch. "Let's move forward with the transfer." The procedure was simple. First, sedate Wilder with a mild anesthetic, then transfer him to the transport crate while he was calm. The goal was to start the 2-hour drive to the release area, arriving with him alert enough for a safe release. As Tom prepared the sedation dart, Melissa set up the monitoring equipment, and Kayla positioned herself for the transfer. The process began smoothly. Wilder received the sedative and gradually relaxed, allowing safe handling. But then, a sound from the main building interrupted their focus. It was the distinct, high-pitched mew of a kitten, Snowflake. Although she was in a closed room some distance away, she called out as if sensing the commotion. Even while sedated, Wilder lifted his head, his ears perked up, and he tried to stand. "He's resisting the sedative," Melissa said, concern creeping into her voice. "We need to act fast." The team sprang into action, working quickly and efficiently. They moved the cat into the crate, but as they secured the door, he became more and more distressed. Despite being sedated, Wilder was responding to Snowflake's calls, pawing at the door and vocalizing back. Thomas noticed her professional determination faltering as the cat's anxiety grew instead of calming down. According to their protocol, they should have proceeded with transport while the sedative was still effective, yet something felt off. She paused and spoke up, her voice breaking the tension. "Wait, Tom, call Lisa Townsend." Thomas looked at her, understanding her intent immediately. "You're postponing the release?" he asked. "I'm considering all options," she replied, although they both knew what that decision might lead to. "We need a full reassessment." Later that afternoon, the rehabilitation staff convened in the conference room with Lisa Townsend, who had come straight from the city upon their call. Lisa, a well-respected figure in wildlife rehabilitation, had spent the last 40 years in this field, focusing specifically on predators for the past 15. After reviewing the animals' files, she said, "I'd like to observe them together, but not in the same enclosure. We need a controlled interaction under careful supervision." So they placed Snowflake's incubator close to Wilder's enclosure. Now fully alert, Wilder approached and resumed his protective stance. For over an hour, Lisa quietly observed, taking occasional notes while primarily watching the subtle interactions between the two animals. "In my professional opinion," she finally stated, "there's a genuine cross-species bond here that is vital for both of their well-being." She explained that Wilder had formed what could be called an alloparental attachment. He had effectively taken on a parental role for the kitten. "Can he still be released?" Thomas asked, though he suspected what Lisa might say. She shook her head. "I wouldn't recommend it. The trauma from separation could affect his ability to reintegrate into the wild. He might end up searching for human habitats looking for the kitten, or he may struggle with hunting due to stress." With this, she addressed the unspoken concerns lingering in the room. This isn't about projecting human emotions onto them. It's about recognizing that trauma and attachment can exist in various forms across species. As they navigated the intricate process of caring for the animals, Thomas felt a shift in responsibility. The team had the capacity to accommodate both Wilder, the wild cat, and Snowflake, the domestic kitten. Lisa confirmed that her facility was equipped with large natural enclosures suitable for permanent residents. Wilder would have access to nearly an acre of forest, complete with climbing structures, enrichment activities for hunting, and proper shelter. Importantly, Snowflake could still be close by, with separate access to indoor spaces for his specific needs. The team spent an additional hour going over the logistics, legal permits, transportation details, long-term care plans, and how they could use Wilder and Snowflake's unique experience to support wildlife conservation efforts. That evening, Thomas found himself alone by Wilder's enclosure, observing the cat as he pressed against the mesh, close to where Snowflake's incubator had been placed. Despite her years of professional experience, Lisa found herself speaking gently to Wilder, saying, "This isn't what any of us planned, but maybe it's where you were meant to be all along." After 2 weeks of careful preparation and meeting all legal requirements, the transfer to the Havenwood Rehabilitation Center was set in motion. Located among the ponderosa pine forests outside Sisters, this facility offered a balance of wild freedom and secure captivity. The spacious natural enclosures allowed Wilder to showcase his natural behaviors while ensuring his safety and keeping him near Snowflake. Eleanor, Tom, Melissa, and Kayla accompanied each other on this journey to assist in the transition, bringing both animals to their new home. They watched as Lisa skillfully introduced Wilder to the space, allowing him to explore, while Snowflake remained in a protected carrier nearby for comfort. "We'll take it slow, with full physical contact," Lisa explained, noting their history, "but I don't expect any issues." By sunset, both animals were adapting well. Wilder had thoroughly inspected his new surroundings, while Snowflake was comfortably settled in an adjoining indoor area, accessible through a special entry point. Before the Havenwood team departed, Lisa invited them to share one last moment under her careful supervision. She brought Snowflake, now a healthier 6-week-old kitten, into the main enclosure where Wilder awaited. The cat approached with curiosity, marking a new chapter in their journey. Wilder, the larger cat, approached Snowflake with the same gentle demeanor he had shown at the rehabilitation center. He sniffed the tiny kitten before carefully grooming his own white fur. Despite his size, Snowflake felt no fear and curled up against Wilder's side, his small frame dwarfed by the powerful cat. Wilder circled around Snowflake, finally settling in with a protective paw draped over him. Even Eleanor, a dedicated scientist, found herself with tears in her eyes at the sight. Lisa quietly reflected, "Our job isn't just to heal physical wounds, it's also to honor the emotional ones." 6 months later, Thomas received a package from the Wild Heart Rehabilitation Center. Inside was a bound photo album and a letter from Lisa detailing the progress of Wilder and Snowflake. The photos captured moments of the two cats in their enclosure, Wilder lounging on a high platform with Snowflake beside him, both exploring an enrichment puzzle, and even Snowflake practicing pouncing while Wilder watched closely. The final page featured a printed article from the Oregonian titled, "Unlikely Family, the Cat Who Adopted a Kitten." This feature had gained national attention for rehabilitation centers and highlighted the issue of illegal trapping and its impact on wildlife. Lisa's letter explained how visitors to the center often fell silent while witnessing the bond between Wilder and Snowflake. Their unique friendship had turned them into impactful ambassadors for conservation, inspiring donations that helped rehabilitate numerous injured animals. Many people, Lisa wrote, wondered why Wilder had chosen Snowflake. While scientists might attribute it to nurturing instincts or trauma-induced behavior, those who observed the pair reached a simple conclusion. What they were witnessing was love. Though it wasn't human love, it was genuinely a connection that transcended the boundaries we often impose on the natural world. Thomas placed the album on her office shelf, where staff members frequently paused to look through it during breaks. The rehabilitation center continued its vital work in healing and releasing many wild animals each year. Yet the story of Wilder and Snowflake persisted as a reminder that healing can take unexpected forms and that compassion truly knows no species. At the Wild Heart Rehabilitation Center, nestled among the tall ponderosa pines of Central Oregon, an extraordinary friendship flourished between a wild cat and a domestic cat. Despite their differences in size and nature, they shared a profound bond that surprised everyone who saw them together. When visitors wondered why the wild cat often wrapped around the domestic cat, grooming and keeping it close, Lisa would respond with a smile. She would share the heartfelt truth that even seasoned wildlife veterinarians found moving. Love can be the most effective healing force of all.